Good morning to you, Mark Sutton with HurricaneTrack.com here with your hurricane outlook and discussion a few minutes before 10 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, July the 31st, 2017. The focus of this particular video update is going to be on Tropical Storm Emily, which has formed here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. A special advisory was issued at 8 a.m. Eastern Time. This feature was outlooked by the National Hurricane Center a day or so ago, and it's really not a surprise. We're going to go into that in just a moment, that it's there. But for you folks in the Tampa area and then across parts of Central Florida, I guess if you weren't paying attention, it is a surprise. I didn't even do any video discussions over the weekend, really wasn't worried about too much, and I'm still not, but it's certainly worthy of discussing now that it is Tropical Storm Emily and what we can learn from it, especially its inception. Where did it come from, and how did it do so quickly? First of all, let's take a look at the forecast track here of the next 5 days going to cross Florida. And if it survives intact, it's a small circulation. We'll look at that too. We've got a lot to look at here. It moves out into the Atlantic. It could be a trackable feature over the next several days, and it might add an ace point or two to the overall score for the season. And other than impacts to Florida, that's probably going to be the end of it, so to speak, but we'll see. You never say never, as Emily has taught us, right? Well, the first lesson here is that we had a front come down, and we had beautiful dew points, cooler temperatures in the 60s at night in most locations here, much drier air mass as a result of this very strong, anomalously strong cold front, stronger than normal for this time of year. But it did bring a refreshing change to areas up over the deep south, while at the same time it definitely set up this boundary of convergence where the air is coming together, a natural grapevine. I use that expression a lot, and as we see here with Emily, and this is the storm right here entering just south of the mouth of the Tampa Bay area right there, Tampa St. Pete, and we'll look at a radar shot of it in just a moment. But this is not uncommon when you have fronts that drape themselves over very, very warm water temperatures. And in fact, we can see that here, that the surface water in the Gulf of Mexico, right around where Emily has formed, this green indicates 30 degrees Celsius, and there's even a few pockets very shallow compared to the open Gulf of 31 Celsius. So there was lots of latent heat in the atmosphere, a fancy way of saying that the atmosphere had plenty of energy available for Emily to take advantage of, and all you needed was that front to come down, which it did, and it left sort of this focusing mechanism for Emily to develop. And we can see that right here on the vorticity side of things. This shows spin in the atmosphere, and look at this. It's just literally like that grapevine I talk about, a rope, and Emily's like a knot on that rope, okay? And so this is all energy focused over the Atlantic Ocean and into the Gulf, and water temperatures in here very warm, and this spun up very quickly due to processes in the atmosphere that I'm not going to get into here. They're somewhat complex, but it's not your typical fashion for development. Normally we see tropical waves like this one over here that come off Africa and they develop already, but frontal systems and upper level lows are sort of your genesis or seedlings for tropical systems to develop it. At the tail end of these fronts, which is exactly where Emily is located, that can happen from time to time. We look back in history. In 1984, Hurricane Diana formed from an old front, and it moved its way up into the southeast North Carolina area, and was at one point a Category 4 hurricane from an old frontal boundary. So it's I think in 1991, Hurricane Bob, the same thing from an old front. So you never turn your eyes away from these, especially in seasons like this, with water temperatures as warm as they are, and in some cases warmer than they should be. Looking at the upper level winds, I want to try to zoom in on this if I can. Emily located right in here, very small area of light enough upper level winds in the face of very strong upper level winds out here. Let me draw that in yellow out ahead of the system, but just this tiny little area. And so Emily similar to Umberto back in 2007, taking advantage of a small window of opportunity in Texas when that developed. Emily doing the same thing here in the eastern Gulf of Mexico. You only need, apparently, 100 or so square miles of atmosphere to be conducive for something to develop, and therefore we have a small system, and yet it's potent enough that it has become a named storm. Now, looking at the broad picture, I want to point this out. This is important that we talk about impacts. Clearly, the southern half of the peninsula of Florida, literally if you divide the I-4 corridor here as the sort of line of demarcation, south of there, a rainy day, finally going to break the heat down here in Florida, and South Florida that is. Miami probably won't make it to 90 today, we'll see. But where is Emily in all of this? Well, there's the tiny little circulation center right there. And before we get into a closer shot, let me just point out that with this heavy rain, of course, the threat of maybe an isolated waterspout, maybe a tornado on land as these bands come in, but it's not a very high threat. The biggest issue is going to be heavy rain. So if you're traveling through this area, you know the region I-75 along the west coast over here, and then it crosses into southeast Florida, the I-95 and the Florida Turnpike corridors here. Very wet, so if you're out there traveling and you're in some of that tropical rainfall, it's pretty dense and pretty solid, a rain shield, so please be careful out there. Rain in and of itself is a hazard from these tropical systems, not just the wind and the surge and the other headline grabbers. So this is the radar out of Tampa, and you can see this very small circulation now moving in Tampa Bay right in here. Luckily, it's not moving northeast into Tampa Bay, which would shove, probably 3 or 4 feet of water in there because of the nature of the bathymetry in this region. In this case, it's moving east, but it does have a south of east component to it. It's not moving, directly east at 90 degrees. It's moving a little bit south of east, so more than likely the center, which is located right there, going to make landfall here somewhere north of Sarasota, perhaps, maybe the Bradenton Beach area. Bradenton proper, we'll see. But that's the center of circulation, and, somewhat organized, especially for a tiny little tropical storm here. But, this is one of those situations, again, don't focus necessarily on the center, because obviously a lot of heavy rain out here, and then more associated with the front farther to the south and east from there. I did notice on Twitter, Michael Lowry, who used to be with the Weather Channel, a storm surge expert and a lot of other things too, was pointing out from someone else. I didn't have time to pull it up for this. I wanted to put this quote on the air as quick as I could. I guess it's technically on the internet, right? But you get the idea. But that storm surge was starting to come in to areas like Fort Myers. So you see just a little bit of an agitation of the wind field at all. With any onshore flow down here, you're going to get a rise in water levels. So just keep that in mind. Nothing too substantial, though, from that. But we'll see what happens as this crosses the coast over the next, probably 12 hours or so. Again, the main threat here, very heavy rain. If you have vacation plans for today or tomorrow in the Orlando area, not to worry. This should, look at that. That's really remarkable that literally the line of demarcation is just about the I-4 corridor through here, a little bit to the north there, but the resort areas around Orlando, you might not even notice this going through unless it turns the corner, and starts to move more on a northeasterly fashion over the next several hours. We're going to have to watch that. Does it do this? In which case it might bring some more rainfall towards the Orlando area. But other than that, a novelty, something that we can talk about at the water cooler or whatever on discussion boards on Twitter. But a couple of key points here. It is not a sign that the hurricane season is going to be really bad or severe. It's just an old front that was in the right place at the right time over very warm water. It was talked about by other people out there that you follow. Joe Bastardi was talking about the possibility. The National Hurricane Center, it's not like it jumped up out of nowhere, but it does show that systems close to home, and in this case Tampa Bay and vicinity, need to be watched, because one day the fear is that you get something like the 1935 hurricane in the Keys that develops over Andros Island as a tropical storm in the Bahamas, and by the time it crosses parts of the Keys, it's a Cat 5 hurricane. That's extremely rare, but we look back at Umberto in 2007, and it went from a depression to almost a Category 2 hurricane in under 18 hours or whatever it was. So you never know. A lesson in, how tropical systems, especially when they are small like this, can ramp up very quickly close to land. So luckily for folks in Tampa, this is not sitting 12 hours farther out into the Gulf of Mexico to make landfall later today. Speaking of later today, this is an update purely on Tropical Storm Emily. My regular Monday update I'm still going to produce later this afternoon around the 2 o'clock Eastern Time hour, in which case we will get into much more in-depth discussion on the rest of the tropics, sea surface temperature anomalies, and that kind of thing. Plus, we'll have the latest look on Emily. So the afternoon update's probably going to be pretty lengthy, so make yourselves comfortable, get in the recliner when you watch it, because it'll be a little bit long in the tooth, but I think well worth it. Alrighty, well that is it for me for this morning. Again, I will be back this afternoon around 2 Eastern for another update on what's happening with Emily and the rest of the tropics. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you in about 4 hours.